Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Supply Chain Risk Management's Consortium's second webinar in this series on linking finance and supply chain worlds, building the resilient enterprise. Just to let you know, our assessment takes about 30 minutes to complete and provides you a good way to get started on understanding where you're at in these finance and supply chain worlds. Again, we appreciate you joining us today. In today's webinar, it is an interactive webinar, and so please do enter into the chat. I see South Africa is on the phone. Thank you. So we got South Africa and the West Coast of the US and probably a few other places around the world. Welcome, everyone. This is the second in the series of webinars linking finance and supply chain worlds. And March 26th, we'll do geopolitical risks impacts to the supply chain will be our next webinar. And we do have strategic geopolitical risks webinar out and available. We have 2 snippets out there. One will be coming out this week on strategic geopolitical risks, and we had one a couple of weeks ago on that. So you'll be seeing that. Upcoming, we'll have webinars in business continuity and bow tie analysis coming up here. So look out for those webinars, and we appreciate you joining today. If you have any other ideas for webinars, please let us know. And always know that these webinars are on our website, the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium website, and are available at any time. My name is Jim DeVries, founder and president of Enhance International Group, and a good part of Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium. I'll be the host of today's webinar. We also have Connor Fitcham from South Africa joining us to help facilitate today's webinar. So please ask your questions in the chat. We'd love to see them. This consortium has been delivering education webinars, workshops, and consulting, focusing on supply chain risk and resiliency for the last 13 years. Joining us today is Greg Schlegel. He's the founder of the consortium and will share his vast experience. He is the original founder of the consortium, and he's the former president of Apex ASCM. Greg, a few words of introduction.
You bet, Jim. Pleasure to be here with you today. Let's talk about our passion. As Jim mentioned, I am the founder of the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium. We are about 32 companies and 1,700 folks. We'll talk a little bit more about that. I've taught supply chain risk management at Lehigh University for 10 years, and also ERM, Enterprise Risk Management, at Villanova University here in the States. Spent 8 years with IBM as a supply chain executive consultant. Spent 30 years, perhaps like many of you, as a supply chain executive for a host of Fortune 100 companies. I've taught supply chain management at 4 other universities during my career. And as Jim said, kind of a lifelong member of Apex, now ASCM, ultimately becoming the president of the organization. So great to be here, and look forward to a great dialogue. Back to you, Jim.
Thanks, Greg. And a little bit about my background. My core belief is that success starts with discovering the untapped potential of your employees, from leadership down to the shop floor, including suppliers and customers. We live in an ecosystem. It's in developing others that we will excel in building a resilient enterprise. For the past 30 years, as a Master Black Belt supply chain transformation executive and currently a Master Integrator, I've served as a resilient leader for startup companies to Fortune 500s. My global teams have worked collaboratively to identify, prioritize, and deliver high return on investment sustainable improvements, generating self-funding results. Have held leadership positions in sales, supply chain, finance, reporting, new product development, and a number of other areas. My career started in the 1980s under Jack Welch, and it's a pleasure to be here. And we look forward to your interaction throughout the webinar. Please do join the poll EV that's in the chat. and was in the email that was sent out earlier today. With that, we'll get started on what our deliverables today are. First, our deliverables for linking finance and supply chain worlds. Our first deliverable is we'll gain a sense of what is important in the finance and operations perspectives. And then secondly, the synergies between finance and operations. We will discuss that there are synergies there and how to capitalize on those. Next, we will share approaches on how to optimize these synergies for the good of the enterprise, and including a case study on how a company had developed synergies between finance and operations. And then we'll get into building a resilient enterprise. We have a roadmap for you. Again, thanks for joining us. And with that, we'll get started in just a second. But before we do that, one last note here on finance and operations. It is a two-sided coin that we think about when we think about finance and operations. Operation executes the company's mission and strategic goals while consistently adapting for an ever-changing global dynamic world. While finance assures that we allocated our money properly and are aligned to the strategic goals while working as the gatekeepers of the organization's financial health. These two departments are more interrelated and interdependent than many companies realize, and understanding how these two areas work in tandem can yield efficiencies and benefits. Greg will now provide an overview of the consortium. Greg?
You bet. Thanks, Jim. We'll give you a quick thumbnail sketch, who we are and what we do. On the right-hand side, we broke our organization out into 3 pillars. We do a lot of education for the last 13 years. We do consulting, and we also have a host of software, supply chain as a solution, supply chain as a service solution, all organizations reinforcing our vision of our book, which is doing quite well. It's a little getting long in the tooth, 7 years now, but a first of a kind book on supply chain risk management. So we have the 3 pillars. We operate in 23 countries with a host of additional partners. On the left-hand side is what we provide. We got 5 areas. We do online education. It's been out for about 5 or 6 years. You can get 2 certificates from 2 different courses on supply chain risk and resiliency. One is a basic and one is geared towards NGOs and healthcare supply chain services. We do coaching and consulting. We have a host of software as a service platform solutions to do a lot of heavy lifting. And then today we're going to talk about our 2 online assessments. One is supply chain management readiness, and the other is pure risk 90-day action plan driven by AI and ML algorithms. So we'll talk more about them. I'll turn it back to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. And a little bit about Enhance International Group. We're a group of passionate experts to guide your transformation. We have over 50 consultants, consulting companies, and SaaS providers. EIG serves as the master integrator to provide your access to the best and brightest companies. Synergistically, our teams are dedicated to empowering your organization's workforce by leveraging EIG's partners' tenured expertise. Our goal is to provide collective, collaborative, experienced thought leadership to enable organizations to deliver self-generating positive margin growth. This is our strategy and execution wheel. And from a strategy perspective today, we're talking about finance and operations and finding synergy between them in order to drive the company forward. With that, Greg, the agenda.
You bet. Thanks, Jim. We have a couple of threads here that we want to share with you. First, we'll talk a little bit about unveiling challenges within the finance and supply chain arena. We'll go through a couple of threads there. Then we'll explore synergies, as Jim mentioned in the deliverables, between the 2 worlds. We think there are a host of them. Next, we'll provide some insight into leveraging those synergies for your optimal performance. And then we'll finish up with extracting valuable takeaways, which will also include some helpful hints and a real short case study. So with that, let's begin. We said we'd start by unveiling challenges within the finance and supply chain arena. So Jim's going to start us off with a couple of thoughts.
Thanks, Greg. Job functions of the chief financial officer, and just as start thinking about what's not on this list. This is just a few things to get us started. Of course, they manage the financial actions of the company. They track cash flow. They analyze the strengths and weaknesses of the company's finances, oversee all aspects of the financial success. Of course, present and report accurate, timely company financial information to the stockholders and internally. And then they take a decision and taking a decision and maintaining capital structure. So they're always looking at how is the capital outlay. So these are just some of the major job functions of a CFO. And on our next polling question here, our first polling question here is, did we miss anything? So it looks like we got started already. Some folks entered in taxes, audit, budgeting. So those are also big areas that come up with the CFO. Any other areas that come up to mind, Greg?
Taxes are good, yeah. Normally taxes and auditing, that's normally falling under finance. We'll talk a little bit more. If your organization is global, chances are folks in the finance group are doing some kind of hedging in terms of exchange rate risk. So I thought we might see that in here, but all depends on the scope and scale of our audience's companies, but all good.
Yeah, and we did gain some additional feedback here on the chat, potential new client vetting for sure. Yeah, things are coming in, which is nice. Product should cost, I'm sorry, cost calculations. Yeah, product cost calculations. All good things. Yeah, there's a lot of things that come under the roof. Generally, there you got the core things above, and then when things go wrong, you have taxes. But very often, getting taxes right in every part of the world on every street is an audacious goal. That's a tough thing to do. So that's always plaguing them. You really have the finance and the accounting arms, and they kind of work a little bit differently and a little bit different perspective. All good. Thanks for your feedback. Appreciate it. With that, we'll move on.
Yep. The other side of the coin, the chief supply chain officer, a couple of job functions that we wanted to tee up and spark some dialogue. Take a look at some of these. What do we do in supply chain? Well, develop and execute innovative strategies to do what? Improve customer service, reduce cost, and manage risk. We're going to talk about that all day. What else? Creating the company's supply chain strategy, but of course, that's pretty key. Analyzing data from shipping, delivery, customer, supplier, find bottlenecks. You bet we do that every day, and solve them, mitigate them, evaluating and reporting on key performance indicators. But of course, I think at the moment we have like 28 or 30 that we can utilize within the supply chain arena. Monitoring logistics, sure, to make sure inbound and outbound's running pretty good, pretty smooth. Maintaining supply chain inventory and records, real tight connection with finance there. And then overall training and guiding employees. So we wanted to tee up a couple, and Jim, I think we'll give them an opportunity to talk about what we might have missed.
Yeah. So we kind of missed uh, two probably areas that the chief financial officer or chief supply chain officer gets involved with. One is customers, of course, customer complaints. That's very often uh, uh, something that the chief uh, supply chain officer has to manage, as well as supplier challenges.
Yep.
So they generally get involved in big customer deals or big supplier deals, as well as challenges that result from those relationships.
Yep. Very.
ESG, that's another
Yep.
one.
You bet.
Yeah,
Sure. We're going to talk about that. My comment to the audience is, as an old supply chain professional, is if your chief supply chain officer is not getting engaged with suppliers and customers, chances are you're not taking a holistic view, end-to-end view of your supply chain. So all good. Glad that folks made that injection, because that implies that that discipline is touching suppliers and customers in terms of having an end-to-end view of the supply chain.
absolutely. And so thank you for entering the supplier audits for sure. And as we talked about, ESG is another good area. All good things.
Get there.
Uh, thank you for participating in that. And with that, I think we'll get started on the next section, which is exploring synergies between these two worlds of finance and supply chain. So with that, some of the challenges, although this is from 2022 from CFO Dive, it's pretty still relevant today. Um, Material cost, uh, supplier delays, supplier shortages, transportation cost, and that's really with all the things happening in Yemen and so forth. That little causeway there, so to speak, is causing a lot of problems. Demand unpredictability, and trade compliance, and of course, customer expectations. We talked a little bit about that, and lack of technology and labor shortages, and third-party data breach and cyber. So cyber is probably moving up in this list. Maybe not in today is what we're hearing, but these does encompass quite a number of the challenges for CFOs. Greg, any additional thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of synergy right there between what chief financial officers, what keeps them up at night. I think there's some good synergies there, and we'll talk more about synergies between the two disciplines. But if you look, a lot of those are essentially operational oriented supply chain issues that affect the organization's bottom line. So I
Yeah,
thought CFO Dive, for those of you who are looking for good magazines online and so forth, CFO Supply Chain Dive, they're a great resource. They dig into a lot of tactical and operational issues across both disciplines, just for your edification.
great comment, Greg. Thank you. With that, we'll move over to another perspective from the supply chain perspective. Greg
Yeah.
will help us with this.
Yeah, this again, this comes from Gartner. This is Chief Supply Chain Officer Challenges, Expectations of Changes over the next 10 years from our friends at Gartner. This was a survey. The legend, the color coding is the black are areas where the respondent said these changes and challenges are going to increase. The gray is basically saying we're going to stay the same. And then the orange is a decrease from the respondents' survey opinions. I'll just touch the top five. Digital commerce, you bet it's out there, folks. Digitizing your supply chain, you hear it every day. It's coming to our discipline if you're in supply chain. Second, adoption of new business models. That's essentially part of the digital commerce, part of e-commerce, part of essentially even think about AI, using AI. So there are a lot of disruptors coming at us over the next couple of years in terms of developing new business models to thrive and in 2024 and beyond. Third, changes in customer behavior. That is happening right now across all sectors. The fourth is risks and opportunities from ESG. That's environmental, social, and governance frameworks associated with all sectors. And then the fifth was, this is an interesting one, is why we highlighted it, demand and orders from machine customers. This is very new. 82% said that's going to increase relative to their business, whatever business they might be in. And think about it, you know, your next customer could be an AI-driven machine. Very interesting. And I'll touch one more below that, the sixth, cadence of risk events and disruptions. Our passion, it's right there at 82%. It's going to grow. It's with us for the rest of our days in supply chain. So we wanted to share with you a couple of challenges that Gartner put together after a pretty exhaustive survey. So with that, we'll move on to another arena. And that is a different twist here. Now we'll start talking a little bit about both disciplines and how they essentially can help each other. First and foremost, everything is about money, all right? We're in business to make money. Key financial drivers. What are those? Even in supply chain, optimize the overall financial performance of the organization. How do you do that in supply chain? Well, you need to help grow revenue. That's the green. You need to help reduce costs. That's the operating income margin. We'll talk about that in a second. And you need to help in terms of capital utilization, which is really turn the assets, you know, turn and earn, we call it. So those are three drivers in terms of how supply chain can impact the key financial drivers. We'll talk a little bit more about each one here. If we can put it up there. From an operating income margin, yes, we in supply chain can impact the margins. How or why? Because we manage 80% of the cost of goods. If you're a manufacturer, all right, we control 80% of the cost of goods of the organization. We also can have an impact on selling SG&A, all right, that you see there, and depreciation and amortization on both fixed and variable assets. So we can make an impact. There's more on the capital utilization. What you see here on the right-hand side are the three elements of what we call cash operating cycle. Some call it cash conversion cycle, cash operating cycle, but it's days in inventory. All right, we can control that. Days sales outstanding. If you're talking to your customers and touching them, of course we can impact that, especially with service agreements. And days purchasing outstanding, that is your supply base. So if your supply folks, if procurement is reporting to a chief supply chain officer, you can absolutely impact those three elements, which we're going to give you in a second in terms of how to calculate your own cash conversion cycle. So with that, we'll move on. Here's kind of a real simplistic approach to calculating cash conversion cycle. It involves inventory, receivables, and payables. The general calculation on the top is inventory days of supply plus receivables days outstanding minus payables. Let's take a look at the bottom portion of the boxes. How do you calculate inventory days of supply? Take your average inventory, divide it by cost of goods, divide by 365, and you get the number of days of inventory that you hold. The receivables do the same thing. Average accounts receivable, divide it by your revenue, divide by 365, and you get the number of days sales outstanding, meaning revenue due you to the bottom line. And then payables, same thing. Average payables divided by cost of goods divided by 365, and you get payables, days out, days payable. So you just take inventory plus receivables minus payables, and you get a calendar profile, the number of days in calendar. We're not looking at dollars here. We're looking at calendar days. That's how we measure cash conversion cycle. All right. The lower the number, the more cash you can provide. The higher the number, the less cash. Let's take a real quick picture of a story. Everyone knows Dell. Dell essentially picked up on cash conversion cycle back in the late 80s. All right. As you can see on the left-hand side, this is a graph of Dell's historical cash conversion cycle in number of calendar days. Back in the late 80s, you see the high point of about 200. All right. At that point in time, that industry, the PC computer industry, averaged around 120 to 150 days. They were very high. They got religion and said, we're going to change the game. And so you can see how it dropped precipitously pretty quickly. And why did it drop? So let's talk about the story, what they did on the right-hand side. First and foremost, on the top, they said as a company, we're not going to have finished goods anymore. What do you mean? We're not. We're not going to hold finished goods because it's the riskiest and most the priciest product in our arena. And people, if they don't want to buy purple laptops, we have a problem. So they said, no more finished goods. So they kept everything below the finished goods area and said, we're going to assemble to order. We're going to let people order and configure their own products. What else did they do on accounts receivable? They started using credit cards. Once you got online with the internet, you could configure your product. You could then order the product, hit submit, give them your credit card, and they got paid within 5 days from the credit card company. Unbelievable reduction in accounts receivable days. Over on the left-hand side, what they do about accounts payable? They did nothing early on. They left their the suppliers' payables net 30, 60, they let that alone. So they reduced inventory, reduced accounts receivable, minus accounts payable, and guess what happened around 1998 in the middle of the graph? They went negative. That's a good thing. The smaller the calendar day, the more free cash you have. Ultimately, they ended up with about a minus 45 days. It was unbelievable. They changed from a push to a pull supply chain, and they pulled the rug out of every manufacturer competitor, including IBM, when I was there at the time. And it took IBM, with all their minions, it took IBM 2 years to transform their supply chain from push to pull. It's a good thing. If you don't calculate cash conversion cycle for your organization, we advocate you do it tomorrow. All right. So we wanted to share that with you and then close out cash conversion cycle with a graph. This is a couple years old, but why should you be concerned? Here's cash to cash cycle time from a company that's still around, PRTM. They're affectionately known as PRTM. They are now owned by PwC again, but this is a couple of years old. They used to gather all the data by industry sector, by company, and then aggregate it by industry sector. And you can see the calendar days on the left from 0 to infinity. Then they would categorize best in class, which is green, and average in class, which is blue. And then they started to profile for everyone the number of calendar days in terms of cash to cash. Take a look. Computers, a couple of years ago, average was 106. The best in class, which was Dell and a few others, were at 20. You can see industrial, telecom, chemicals, CPG, and overall. It's not so much the numbers, the discrete numbers, folks. What we want to get across to you is the difference between being best in class and average. That is free cash that you can take to leverage and improve your supply chain and improve the bottom line. So with that, we wanted to share with you cash conversion cycle. I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. With that, we want to start going into the synergies between CFOs and supply chain officers. And we'll kick it off with manage actions of the enterprise is the CFO focus. And of course, the supply chain officer is looking to improve service, reduce costs, leverage assets, and manage risk. Working together, of course, will help them quite a bit. The CFOs, of course, are looking at forecasting and tracking cash flow, as Greg just discussed. And then, of course, the CSCOs are looking to manage that entire supply chain, making sure that that end-to-end supply chain is flowing well. The CFOs are looking to analyze financial strengths and weaknesses of the enterprise, and the supply chain officers are identifying bottlenecks throughout the supply chain to improve the throughput. The CFOs are looking to oversee all aspects of financial risk. And of course, in order to do that, you need to train and guide employees to get you there. And then as far as presenting and reporting finances, from the CFO perspective, the supply chain officers need to find those supply chain KPIs that relate to the finance. How do they relate? Drawing that correlation to operate the company better to support those supply chain metrics, which will support the financials. Finding that link is a key to success. And then maintaining access to capital and company liquidity, as Greg just discussed. Develop the supply chain officers need to develop company supply chain strategy and successful execution to help get you there. So just a little bit about some strategies and synergies between the two groups. There are different aspects of that, and we encourage you to find out what they are in your company and really focus on building that relationship. So there's a clear one-to-one or 2-to-1 or 3-to-1, whatever that is. What are the operational guidelines in operating the supply chain that's going to support the financials? So what Greg and I thought was like, what do you talk about during your weekly, monthly meetings between finance and supply chain in those operations meetings? What are the major discussion points? And we have a couple comments here. Of course, performance gap. There's a top 3 areas is a very common. Where are we not performing? And of course, the action plan to close that gap. So we welcome additional thoughts from you on what other areas would you want to be talking in these monthly meetings. Greg, your thoughts?
Yeah, we put this in, folks, a little sheepish because we've been around the block in supply chain, and we've kind of worked in many different sectors and so forth. We were just hoping that we would get some feedback that you all in supply chain talk to finance, and finance actually talks to supply chain more than once every quarter. All right, that was kind of a little. We've seen it We hope that doesn't happen, but we wanted to kind of pose and let you kind of give us some feedback in terms of that particular little thread. All right, so
So we got inventory, of course, is coming up,
yeah,
and supplier challenges, shortages,
yep,
inventory.
you bet.
Somebody entered that in twice. Yeah,
Yep.
I would say that inventory is often something that finance brings up, but supply chain often doesn't.
Yep.
It's one of those kind of things, except for shortages, right? So
Mhm.
supply chain saying, what are the shortages? And finance is saying, why do we not have enough space for all the inventory we have? Why do we need to buy another building to put the inventory, right?
Mhm.
Scrap, I
There you
like that
go.
one.
Yep.
That's a good one. Oh, that's a good credit. Yeah,
Yep.
credit.
You
Yeah,
bet.
that's a big one. That's a big one. You're
Hmm.
shutting off suppliers, you're shutting off customers because of credit ratings. Oh, yeah, stop shutting off our
Yep.
customers. They want to place an order. You ever have that call? Uh,
No, it's great. Folks, we appreciate it because this to us is positive reinforcement that there are synergies between the two disciplines. And remember, these are two powerful disciplines, especially in a manufacturing company. Supply chain managing 80% of the cost of goods, and finance watching the numbers for the good of the organization. You put these two organizations together, talk more frequently. Wow, we think that's a strategic advantage. So thanks for reinforcing our premise that there are some pretty heady synergies between the two groups.
yeah, and not to take away the last comment that's in the chat, air freight shipments. Why are we air freighting shipments when we should have sent them on a ship? That's another famous discussion point. What the heck
Yep.
are all these air freight charges for?
Yep, all good, all good. We appreciate your activity and your getting engaged with us here. And like I said, reinforcing that there are some pretty good synergies in terms of why the two powerful groups should be talking all the time.
Excellent. Thanks so much. With that, I think we could probably sit here for the rest of the meeting, just talk about this, but we're going to move on. Excellent.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Yepper. We're going to move into section leveraging the synergies. So let's take a look. We'll start with this slide, kind of a tee it up slide. We'll talk about we are talking about three spheres in our mind: supply chain, risk, which is our passion, and finance. You add those three together, and that potentially can produce a pretty sustainable growth in terms of the organization, top line and bottom line, at maybe a predictable cadence the more and more you discuss with each other in what we call the VUCA world. The VUCA world stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. That is what we all live in today in our global supply chains. So we wanted to tee it up talking about the three spheres, and then on the left and on the right are all the threats and the risks that are posed to both disciplines, supply chain and finance. They are the risks and the threats. So with that, we'll move into kind of a dialogue slide where we want to talk together about what we call the DuPont model. So Jim, if you'd want to start us off.
I'll just kick us off to see as this slide unfolds. Of course, we're talking about the DuPont model and the focus on return on investment. And what does return on investment equal? Well, it equals the asset turnover times profit margin. And if we break down asset turnover into operating income and total assets, and then take total assets and sum the current and fixed assets to get the total assets, And then the current assets are a lot of what we've been discussing already, the accounts payable, inventory, accounts receivable, and cash flow. So those all flow into your asset turnover. From a
Mhm.
profitability perspective, it breaks out into the EBIT. You often hear that. Sometimes you hear EBITDA before uh, amortization and amortization, but uh, depreciation, I should say, and amortization. But we're just talking about EBIT here and divided by operating income. Then we get into operating income, operating expenses, and non-operating income. So that gives you a little bit about what the DuPont model is and why they focus on return on investment as a overall metric that they report out in those monthly and quarterly meetings that we just got done discussing. And then what we've done is kind of just identified uh, where the methodology, where the areas, finance and supply chain focus. So supply chain, we identified with the stars. Those are typical metrics that you'll see in supply chain scorecards. And then from a financial perspective, the ones that tend to be more about what the finance folks are. So with that,
Mhm.
I'll turn it over to Greg to add some comment and color.
Yeah, we're not sure if you're that familiar with the DuPont model. It's been around for ages, folks. Really, it really is. But it's a pretty good holistic view of the organization and all the KPIs and elements that impact the financial bottom line. And then by superimposing the areas where supply chain can impact for the organization and the dollars, the money, which is finance going to be watching. It's to me, it's pretty synergistic. I don't know if anyone has ever leveraged it, but we have in the past as an old supply chain and sales and operations planning process owner. We've used it to the point where we built a model. You can model this on Excel and so forth, and then use it to do what if scenarios when you're building a supply chain strategy or redesigning your supply chain. And then you can get finance engaged with you during that what if scenario, and you are now collaborating. All right. And I'll give you one other example. What we used to do is as an S&OP process owner, where we would have monthly meetings, as a supply chain professional that you are tightly aligned with finance. When finance is hovering in your monthly meeting, waiting for you to give them the future demand signals, the demand volume, so they can dollarize that, and the inventory projected out into the next 18 months, and the capacity, and the supplier's purchases. That's when you know you have some good collaboration. When they are banging the door down, waiting for you and your team to put together the model output for a monthly supply or a sales and operations planning, that's when you know you got some good collaboration and some good synergy. Why? Because finance believes in what you're doing and believes in numbers. So just a little quick little caselet of one, how to maybe utilize the DuPont model, and two, kind of a profile of good collaboration. So I wanted to share that with you.
Yeah, it's an excellent tool and an excellent set of metrics to help you model different supply chains as you grow, especially in a planning perspective. So we have a question here on the DuPont model. What areas in the DuPont model resonate for your business discussions between operations and finance? So we welcome your feedback here. We have accounts receivables, EBIT. Are there other areas where you were, when you look at this model, that where you see where they complement each other, and where you can see performing planning for future planning in your quarterly and yearly planning, that it can help you. Greg, your thoughts?
Yeah, you bet. Accounts receivable, EBIT. It's a, to me, it's a holistic approach that,
Mm-hmm.
you could potentially even use it as an icebreaker and start to just profile that DuPont model and sit down with a couple of your finance friends and talk about putting that together. What kind of benefits could we derive if we worked together, putting scenarios? We call them what if scenarios. What if
Yep.
we drop the inventory? What if we change our accounts payable? And you could put that into the model and they can provide the real life data, and it becomes like a working document, almost a session every time you get together between the two disciplines. So, I hope it you may be able to leverage it, because we've done it many times and it's worked, folks. So just to
Yeah,
give you some insight.
I think the key here is these are not fixed numbers. Don't get fixated that this is where you're at. Get fixated on how you can make these change and how it can improve your return on investment, and what do you need to do to get there, and drive that conversation in that manner.
Mhm.
So with that, we just want to cover a little bit here on the collaboration exercises to drive this joint process development. We're introducing two tools, the supply chain assessment and risk appetite, and looking at it from a people, process, and data perspective. Of course, both of these assessments, the supply chain management readiness assessment, as well as risk appetite, you need stakeholders. The risk appetite, you really need to have that collaboration. You're sitting in that room, the face to face. The assessment you take independently, and then you sit in the room. Both of these require stakeholder collaboration. From a process perspective, the supply chain management assessment gives you that end-to-end internal process review of your supply chain. And from a risk appetite, it's how do you make decisions? What kind of culture do you have to make decisions? And from a data perspective, the assessment gives you ratings and output. It gives you maturity. So you do have an assessment of how you perform today. And you could look at it as, what are the areas that we want to focus? Which of the 13 tenants do we want to be focusing on? And then you can do a before and after. And then from a risk appetite perspective, it's positioning your output. How are you positioned? What is your positioning to take on risk to improve your supply chain performance? And with that, we're going to move into the two assessment tools here. And Greg's going to kick us off here. Greg?
You bet. You bet. Thanks, Jim. We got some tools that we think that can help you leverage the synergies beyond the DuPont model. The first on the left is our supply chain management readiness. It takes a look at your supply chain process maturity, and we'll give you a thumbnail sketch in a minute. On the right, as Jim was talking about it, we have a risk appetite profile as well that we're going to give you some explanation on the tools in terms of what they do and how we think they can help you foster the dialogue. So on the maturity assessment, supply chain maturity assessment, if you're a manufacturer, we have 13 manufacturing tenets. The couple right here are: one, leadership, that's culture; balanced scorecard, we think that's important, that's a business framework; intentional redundancies, meaning suppliers, do you actually overtly develop alternative suppliers? The next level, which we color code them, all right, because they're strategic, tactical, and operational. The next are demand management. How do you treat your customers? How do you do demand management? What's your industry practices? Different industries have different SOPs. Information system, not what you use, what you have, your sophistication. Integrated supply chain. Do you think about supply chain end to end? Risk mitigation planning, do you do it? It's kind of binary. You either do or you don't. Then in the other, filling in the tenets are, what's your supply base look like there? Number 9. Do you do S&OP process? We think that's important as a framework. Adaptive manufacturing, what kind of processes do you have? Logistics, of course, inbound and outbound, and then how agile is your supply chain? And if you don't manufacture product, we have another tool in the same breath that is service oriented, and that replaces supply chain processes, replace the adaptive manufacturing. If you don't manufacture, you go to another tool, and you can, and it asks you questions about what are your supply chain processes. So we wanted to share that with you. This is what it looks like. All right, kind of a graph. It's something like 92 questions. You can see the 13 tenets. Essentially, they're blue, red, and green. Blue is leadership, or blue is strategic. Red is tactical, and green are operational. And essentially 13 tenets, we think that provides you a good picture image of end to end. As you get farther away from the center of the graph, you have less mature processes. It evaluates your supply chain processes, maturity, and risk. So the closer you are to the center, the more mature your processes are. Farther away, less mature. The closer you are to the center, the less risk you have within those processes. The farther away, it's the reverse. And then you can see the black line. The black line, it graphs your answers. You can then see where you reside in terms of the 0 to 10, the maturity, and then you can see the risk levels. Green, orange, red. We call red the infamous ring of fire, but you can see the inherent risk areas within the chart. And essentially, it's a dialogue starter. So we always ask, how mature are your supply chain processes? So it gives you a good picture image answering the 92 questions. And folks, it's free. All right, so we wanted to make sure we mentioned that. What's going on with the assessment at the moment? We have over 300 active users in the platform. It's free across all those industries, and you can just tee up a couple of testimonials. I'll read 2, folks. Consumer packaged goods. The SCM readiness tool was very thorough and truly an end-to-end holistic assessment. The scope was much wider than I initially anticipated. That came from a global CPG exec. Down here in chemicals, near and dear to my heart, supply chain management readiness is a critical success factor in our industry, of course. Before the assessment tool, we felt we had a pretty robust supply chain approach. The tool was a terrific wake-up call for our supply chain team. That was a chemical VP of supply chain. So with that, we just wanted to give you a sense of the supply chain readiness assessment tool to maybe move the lever forward with you and finance. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
So with that, we'll go through the second tool, a little brief overview of the risk appetite tool. And there are 4 risk perspectives in here, and the x-axis is risk management tactics, and on the y-axis is your risk viewpoint, from risk averse to risk opportunity. So above 50%, you have opportunity and risk averse. So let's look at each of the 4 risk perspectives. The first one being the pragmatist, the light brown. These are procrastinators. They wait until the very last minute to make a risk decision, holding out all options, open to the very last moment, basically reactive. The blue are the conservators at the bottom there, from loss of control to diversifying, you see. And its perspective is driven by caution. Mitigating a loss is paramount to risk decision making. The biggest concern to avoiding a loss, very careful to avoid risk. To the bottom line, they want to protect that P&L. So very protectionist types of thoughts and actions there. Then you got the managers in that turquoise in the middle there, right around the 50 percentile there. And this perspective takes a very balanced scorecard approach to risk. Careful to balance risk and rewards, and utilize many tools and techniques to quantify risk. And then you have the maximizers. So the maximizers, they're out there in that light purple, you could call it. They have big words, big rewards, I should say. They go for the gusto and very proactive. Their perspective looked at risk as an opportunity and a competitive differentiation. Maximizers are willing to accept big risk for big reward. Show me the money. Proactive with a solid risk mitigation tactics. So through the years of discussions, we should say that risk perspectives are taken as from a personal risk experience and a position in the company. That personal risk experience is those events that you have encountered and had to deal with. And of course, your current position of the company, if you move, you generally look at risk differently as you move throughout, as you go up in the organization. So again, there's no right or wrong here. It's just how you make decisions. It's a combination of the key stakeholders' perspectives across the company, the supply chain, including manufacturing, procurement, finance, supply chain, marketing, sales. You want to have that cross functional discussion across your room. So that gives you a little bit of idea about this tool. With that, we're going to move to our takeaways today. And there are many benefits of, improving supply chain management process maturity. To the bottom line, of course, you can accelerate revenue growth. That 40 to 60% decrease in product life cycle can help, as well as decreasing plan output. So we can look at revenue. Of course, you have to have customers for all that to absorb all that with your same assets. And then you have to, and to do that, you have to improve your customer satisfaction to make sure you have the flow. And so you can get to that perfect order rate and improve that customer satisfaction. You need to increase savings and cash flow. And we talked about that quite a bit today. And increase inventory turns. And then minimize risk and increase resiliency, through buffer reduction of disruptions in the network. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of some benefits to the bottom line, tying it all together here. Hopefully it's coming together, and we all know cash is king in a crisis. And right now, as interest rates are high, we all know having cash is really, really important. And those companies that are been able to leverage cash, especially with high interest rates, are the companies that are doing very well. With that, Greg's got a story to tell us.
Yep. All good. We'll go through a quick snippet here on Zara. Zara actually used the tool back in 2015. You can see the outcome of their answers on the right. They had one outlier. The outlier was info systems. They were pretty much a leadership in terms of being very mature. They are one of the best in retail, both on supply chain and risk. They were looking at an outlier, which is IT systems. What did they have at that time? 7 years ago, 8 years ago, they had 25 1970-like systems, COBOL, Fortran, and yet they were still operating as a very mature supply chain group and risk. So what did they do? They agreed with the outlier. They actually had a 5-year vision from 2015 to go 5G with their customers. They thanked us. They took that, and what did they do? They built themselves a 24/7, 365 war room to monitor every transaction in their supply chain and risks around their supply chain. Why? Because they have a cash conversion cycle rate of minus 45 days. That means they're a bank. All right. They have unbelievable cash. And we could go to the next slide and just give you a sense of why. They're very resilient. They do supply chain and risk quite well. They've decreased their inventory because they have demand pull supply chains. They hardly have any obsolete inventory because they make small batches at one time. Essentially, they have an operations war room. You can see it up there. We don't know exactly where it is. They also are always in the Gartner rankings. They're always in the top 10. At 2019, they were number 2. They have information technology now, 5G, supporting good supply chain management practices, as you saw in the chart, and good best of breed risk approach. So their strategy: remain agile, flexible, view risk as an opportunity. They drive supply chain innovation. They have informed risk taking. They leverage exceptional cash conversion cycle. Supply chain and finance talk to each other every day. So we wanted to share that little snippet with you and then close with this slide. We call it the 3 E's of organizational synergy between supply chain and finance. Take a look at the slide. You've seen it a couple times. On the left, pretty powerful group, finance. What do they tend to do? Risk management. They might be doing hedging if they're global. They're certainly buying insurance, hazard insurance for the company. All right. They might be advocating enterprise risk management. They might be advocating business continuity planning. All good. On the operations side, what do we got? Supply chain management, quality, plant management, compliance, quality, product quality, facility security. Here's what we see. In supply chain and supply chain risk, a lot of times the education, which is what you're going through right now, we educate a lot of folks on supply chain risk. They tend to come from the operations and supply chain arena. Once that education is there, we tend to see that discussion is elevated. Supply chain folks start to talk to other groups in the operations area and in finance. Once that happens, folks, then we call it engagement. You got the 3 E's: education, elevation, and engagement. And boy, when those 2 disciplines start talking together and leveraging their strengths, that's a pretty solid strategic advantage in our mind. And with that, I'll turn it back to Jim.
Thanks, everyone, for staying on. And we'll just go through this roadmap of resilience with you. Just to close out everything, the readiness assessment performance, we really suggest taking that first to understand where you are, so you understand what journey is ahead of you. So the supply chain maturity, understand where your maturity is, align it to your financial evaluations, as we've talked, the DuPont model and so forth. Start driving those conversations. Understand what your risk appetite is. That's a very rich discussion that we just talked about. And then find those synergies in order to develop that resilient growth. So this is a bit of a roadmap to getting there. And then we just threw in this rad video that will be part of our takeaway here when we send you the slides. Please, that might get the risk, get the folks excited about taking this type of a journey going forward. So closing it out here today, again, we talked about the sense of what's important with financials and ops, and got into the synergies, and then ways to optimize for the good of the enterprise, and then gave you that roadmap just a minute ago. So thank you for joining us and staying a few minutes over here. This was our second webinar in the series. We're going to go back to geopolitical risk impacts in the supply chain, just delving a little bit deeper into at the tactical level versus the strategic, getting into more of the action planning and what you can do. And then we'll be tying out and webinars 4 and 5 with business continuity planning and the bow tie analyses. These are more action-oriented webinars. With that, I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. Connor Fitcham, thank you for supporting the marketing and support of the webinar today. And Greg, of course, thank you for your many insights. Your thoughts, Greg, in closing out.
Yep. Thanks for hanging in with us. We hope we provided a couple of insights regarding these two powerful disciplines. We're convinced that talking with finance about improving supply chain process maturity, embracing cash conversion cycle, and beginning a dialogue on risk will ensure your company, ensure that you will survive and thrive in perhaps a turbulent 2024, folks. So thanks for attending and all the best.
Thanks, Greg. And a few closing thoughts. Again, as Greg mentioned, we're in this VUCA world with many complex risks. It takes diligence to know what to work on first, second, and third, and finding that synergy between finance and supply chain to proactively manage risks can potentially really help you quite a bit. And we all know that one risk event can wipe out all the hard work that operations have done and process improvement has done in just a very short period of time. So understand your risk, proactively manage them with your finance and supply chain folks. Don't wait for it to happen. Proactively address it. With that, thanks again, and we look forward to joining our future webinars, and thanks so much.